Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming. We're on the mics today, both because the acoustics are difficult in here and because we also have people on Zoom. And so they need, in order for them to hear, we have to be up on the mics. I'm Alicia Hunt. I'm the Director of Planning, Development, and Sustainability in the City of Medford. And I thank you all for coming tonight. We have been doing this project jointly with the City of Somerville. And I'm very thankful to Sarah and Riza, who went out and got the grants. And their planning director, Dan, is here. And actually, I think it would be super helpful. There's going to be a point tonight when people are going to walk around. Could all of the staff who are here to answer questions or knowledgeable, like in the city, Jess and everybody, raise your hand so people know who you are? Okay, so these are the staff who can answer questions, and Sal's in the back for Medford. So we have both Somerville and Medford staff here tonight. And this is the end of 3 days of hearing from the public and talking with staff. There were actually a lot of staff interviews that went on, and previous to that, the Somerville staff went out and talked to people in the street and all. And so this is a report back out from what we've heard so far, but this is not the end of the project. So if you have thoughts and ideas, we can still absorb those this evening. And I'm going to turn this over to Jeff from Horsley Witten. So thank you all for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you to everyone who is here in person and virtually this evening. We appreciate you engaging with us. So far, we have engaged over 200 people in this project. We're a smaller group in person today, but we've had some really wonderful in-person and online discussions over the last 2.5 days. And before I jump in, I just want to say for anyone who has not participated in a charrette before, it's a little different beast than a normal round of public meetings. It's been very concentrated. We showed up on Monday, we're here all day yesterday, here all day today, really trying to listen to as many people as possible, synthesize a lot of information, and I really equate it with improvisational theater, right? So we have been listening to people and responding, responding. So what we're going to show you tonight is not a final product by any means. It is hopefully a representation of what we've heard, something that's fresh and based on what we've heard from each and every one of you. So with that, I just want to set expectations. These are not finished plans by any means, but just an expression of what we've heard. So, in terms of how things will go this evening, we will be talking a little more than we did on Monday night. Today is primarily about reporting out to you what we've heard and how we've interpreted that. We will have some time for open Q&A at the end of the presentation. We will take turns between people in person in the audience and people online. And I'll repeat this again when we get to that point, but if you are online and you would like to ask a question or make a comment, please use the raise hand feature, and our staff will call on you when it is your turn. And then after that time, we will close the Zoom meeting. Our staff and team of consultants will remain to answer any other questions. For those of you who are on Zoom, we have everything that you're going to see in the presentation. We have some hard copies that are posted to the wall. So folks who are in person will get a chance to look at those materials, continue talking amongst yourselves and with us. And we encourage everyone, whether you're participating online or here today, to go online to Sommer Voice, and we will show the website later on in the presentation. We do have a third online survey to get people's reactions to what's being presented today. So again, encourage you, whether you are on Zoom today or here in person, and tell your friends and family. All that information will be online probably tomorrow along with the survey. So my name, I guess I should have started with that, is Jeff Davis. I'm with the Horsley Witten Group. We are based in Sandwich, Massachusetts, but our team is mostly from our Providence office. And I am an urban planner, and I'm joined today by our design team, John Ford, raise your hand, and Ellen Bygert, raise your hand, who've been doing amazing work today, doing a lot of the drawings that you see around the room. All right, so show of hands, I do recognize a number of you. How many people here physically in the room were either at any of the meetings on Monday or Tuesday? Great, about half of you. So I will give so apologies if you've already heard this. We're going to give a very brief background for those of you who were not part of those meetings. So for anyone who's not familiar, we are talking about the Broadway corridor that runs approximately a mile on the border between Somerville and Medford. And what initiated this project were all the issues that come about when you have lots that are split between two municipalities. The various sets of rules that manage what can happen on those parcels can be confusing, time-consuming, and expensive. Also, obviously, you've got the new Green Line stations that have opened up, making this corridor underutilized for transit-oriented development. In addition, both the comprehensive plans, master plans of the two communities, Somerville and Medford, vision something different for the corridor. They envision taller buildings, more mixed use, a more walkable environment. And on top of that, not only does your master plans envision that, your existing zoning also allows for that. By and large, a mix of 3 to 4 story mixed use buildings, in some cases taller on the Medford side here. Often you can get up to 6 stories or taller by right. But most buildings along the corridor today are only 2.5 stories tall. So what are some of those barriers to redevelopment? But point being, there's clearly a mismatch between the vision of the two cities and what's actually on the ground today. So I won't go into this in any great detail, but this is the existing zoning map. You can see that the colors differ on either side of the municipal line. Sometimes there's pretty good consistency with what's allowed on one side of the border versus the other. And in other instances, there are differences where one side will allow much taller buildings or a larger variety of commercial uses than what's allowed on the other side. So one of the main goals of this project is to harmonize the zoning on either side. So what have we heard so far? So the public outreach that has occurred to date, on January 22nd, we had a kickoff public meeting on the Somerville side, and that allowed us to ask what people wanted to see protected in the corridor, what you wanted to change, and what you really wanted to transform, things that either were missing or that you wanted to see significantly changed. Next, we did this series of visioning and design charrette. We started on Monday with a public meeting at the premiere on Broadway, which is half in Somerville, or 25% in Somerville and 75% in Medford. And we were there on Tuesday as well, gathering information from the public that you are about to see the results of this evening. Along with all of the in-person events and the Zoom events, we've had all the information up on Somer Voice, and that's voice.somervillema.gov/Broadway-corridor. And that website has all the presentations, all the materials that we have produced to date, including the most recent survey, the second survey, which is still up, and we encourage people to go ahead and take that survey if you haven't already. And again, that third survey, based on the information you see around you tonight, should be up tomorrow. The city staff has also done a series of stakeholder interviews, and they have also gone block by block, talking to anyone they can, business owners, and brought the team of language translators, interpreters, along to make sure that everyone on the corridor could be heard. All right, so what you're going to see tonight, and actually we have some of the results from Monday night on some of the side tables, just as an example of the conversations that we had with the public, really going down the line, block by block along the corridor and thinking about what kind of building heights would be appropriate here, what sort of ground floor uses do you want, and how should the public realm function. So asking all those questions on Monday, and these are just some examples of the feedback that we got on those maps. Here's another example of the input. This shows the feedback on building height. So in brief, the yellow dots are where people felt comfortable with 4 stories. The green dots are where people felt comfortable with more than 4 stories, say 4 to 6. The blue were where people felt comfortable going above 4 stories, but with a step back. So once you get to the 5th floor, you step it back off the street, so it's not as visually obvious. The red dots are where people wanted only a maximum of 3 stories. So really quite phenomenal. I don't remember the last time I did an exercise like this where there was so much consensus that virtually everyone who attended was comfortable with 4 stories or more. And really where people were putting the red dots is in the more residential neighborhoods immediately surrounding the corridor. This is some dots about active ground floor uses. We asked people to put a sticker where they felt we should require commercial uses, retail, restaurants, and so forth on that ground floor. As you can see, the strongest clusters were around Ball Square, around Magoon Square, and actually a little bit around Trump Field, across from Trump Field. There were quite a number of people who wanted to activate that side of the park so that it could be better serviced by people who are using the park. In terms of what we heard on the online survey, and I won't go into the entire results, but just a few key examples, we asked people online to go segment by segment. We split the corridor into 5 arbitrary segments just for the purpose of getting feedback, and asked them how they felt about building height. So this, again, is the online version of what we discussed in person. As you can see, the purple represents more than 4 stories. The pink, more than 4 stories with a setback, and the yellow, 4 stories. So again, really the same story, very similar feedback from the in-person discussions. A vast majority of respondents are supportive of those building heights. In terms of ground floor commercial, so there's a little bit of difference here based on the segment. Segment 1 is that area just around Ball Square, and segment 3 is across the street from Trump Field. You can see in segment 1, a lot of people wanted to allow mixed use, and about half wanted to require ground floor commercial uses. And that makes sense, because that's the heart of your little commercial core for that neighborhood today, and you want to maintain that. On the parcels across from Trump Field, more people were comfortable with allowing a mix of uses, but not necessarily requiring it. So if a building wanted to stay residential, it would stay residential, but if you wanted to put something commercial on the ground floor, you have that option. These we were very interested to find out. We asked the question of all these different aspects of the public realm, which, pardon me, which are the highest priorities for improvements. And if you look to the top, those were the things that people said were more important. On the bottom were things people said were less important. So the top 3 priorities from respondents were walkability and accessibility, bicycle safety and parking, and landscaping, trees, and shade. There are very few trees along the corridor today. On the bottom of that was vehicular circulation, wayfinding, and parking. And if anyone has a bottle of water they could bring up here, that would be fabulous. So some key takeaways related to height and use. Thank you so much. Yep. I'll just hold on to this. Okay, good. To preserve diversity and local small businesses. And I'm sorry, these aren't necessarily all height and use. Well, yes, for height and use. To preserve the diversity and local small businesses was very important. Affordable housing was key, that this has been a more traditionally affordable neighborhood within both communities, and that people desire for that to be preserved. Generally, again, increasing density, 4 to 6 stories, possibly more in select places, and you'll see that in some of the examples. Also wanting to make sure that there are nice transitions between the corridor and the neighboring neighborhood residential. Because you really have a rather narrow, and sometimes the commercial parcels are not very deep, and you transition to strictly residential very quickly. So what can we do with building design to ease that transition? To concentrate the intensity of uses around the MBTA station at Ball Square and Magoon Square, there was a strong desire to see mixed use allowed everywhere along the corridor. Today, there are places that are zoned primarily residential and only allow very, very limited commercial uses. A lot of our respondents wanted to see that mixed use allowance across the corridor. But when we talked about requiring commercial uses on the ground floor, there was a bit of concern about, all right, if we require it in too many places, are we just going to create a lot of vacancies that we can't fill? So being really mindful where we require those ground floor active commercial uses. Key takeaways from the public realm, the need to improve walkability and sidewalks, bicycle infrastructure, the need to protect and improve Trump Field, and really look for other ways to program that space, to utilize it for events, cultural activities, and to look for other opportunities for public gathering spaces along the corridor. To add more green space, again, adding trees where we can, adding greenery to plazas, to improve infrastructure and align with future build-out. And this is something we'll go into in a bit greater detail in a second, but water, sewer, electric, street capacity, making sure that we're making the investments in the infrastructure that can support the added density that people are requesting. We want to improve placemaking and connections between the squares. A lot of people feel like the squares are rather isolated from one another, and not everyone realizes how close they are. You've got great sidewalks, but do people understand how easy it is to walk? Are there other ways that we can visually make that a more pleasant experience? And then finally, again, prioritize local culture in the public realm in both investments and programming. So the local culture of the neighborhood should be reflected in the public spaces, and there should be spaces to program and celebrate the culture of the community. All right, so moving on, based on all this feedback that we got from the public, we started to think about, all right, what are some of the guiding principles for this project? And I should say that while our team is primarily focused on zoning, and the main deliverable for this particular project is going to be a framework for zoning for the corridor. We've been listening to whatever concerns people have brought to the table on a variety of topics. So while this particular effort is going to be focused on zoning, both cities are going to continue to collaborate on a number of other issues and opportunities that will improve the corridor. So our basic guiding principles, we want to build taller, we want to build denser. That was a very clear directive from the public, that people want more zoning that allows commercial uses. There are too many spots along the corridor today where a lot of commercial uses are not allowed, and people want to expand that. To support local businesses, that as things change, we want to make sure that we're investing in grants, in technical assistance, in other programs that will help the existing businesses not only survive but thrive through these changes. To encourage affordable housing, again, to making sure that whatever is built here, that a strong percentage is set aside as de-restricted affordable housing, that we're building housing types that are needed in the community, and that we're enhancing local services. So anything we can do as communities to incentivize grocery stores, daycare centers, all the other day-to-day needs of an increased population along this corridor. We want to also activate and beautify the public realm, again, investing in programming and events and activities, and also just making it a more pleasant environment to walk and explore for residents and visitors alike. And to continue to invest in mobility improvements in terms of the roadway, parking, bicycling, and walkability. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about what we mean when we say harmonizing zoning. And this is when I get to be a zoning nerd and get in the weeds on what zoning can do for you and what it really shouldn't do for you, right? There are certain things that really don't belong in zoning. So when we say harmonizing zoning, we're going to be looking at setbacks. How far does a building have to be from the street? How far does it have to be set back from its neighbors and other dimensional standards beyond just the building height? We want to try to avoid oddly shaped buildings that are complying with one set of rules on one side and a different set of rules on the other, so you can have a building that makes sense. We also want to look at use allowances. So, for example, what does Medford consider to be a commercial use? What does Somerville consider to be? These can be different, and it's important to make sure that those are harmonized so that when you say this type of use is allowed here, it's allowed on both sides, and there's no question. We also need to harmonize parking requirements. So when you say, 2 parking spots per apartment, or 1, or what have you, that should be standardized across the border. And also affordable housing requirements. Right now, Somerville generally requires up to 20%, Medford up to 15%, depending on the size of the project. That's, again, something that we want to harmonize so that applicants aren't trying to play one community off the other. Everyone should be working off the same rules. In terms of split lots, those lots that are split between Medford and Somerville, there are certain processes that we're going to want to try to change, and we're just starting this conversation. So we spent a lot of time with city staff identifying potential issues for collaboration, potential conflicts, but when an application comes in, is there a possibility to harmonize and have a single application if you're, that you can submit to both cities? When we schedule neighborhood meetings, when a developer is coming into the neighborhood and says, I have this great idea, I'm going to go meet with the Medford residents and then I'm going to go meet with the Somerville residents. Can that happen once? Can we bring the whole community together and hear everyone's side at the same time? And likewise for municipal review meetings, once an application is in for development, and this is just a question, maybe we can't figure this out, but we're going to ask the question, can there be joint planning board discussions of both cities where everyone comes together and reviews these applications at once? If not, what are some other options? How can we formalize that relationship? How can we formalize the sharing of documents and reports and other information and make sure that at a minimum, representatives from Somerville are present at Medford meetings and vice versa. So again, that process is smooth and you don't have one side telling you something and the other side telling you something else, or an applicant trying to play against each other. So other coordination items, again, this is primarily about zoning, but we have heard a lot about other issues along the corridor that are going to need to be resolved and are going to require continued coordination between the 2 municipalities. A big one is electric utilities. The Somerville side has Eversource, Medford has National Grid. And the capacity of the grid in this area is somewhat spotty. Maybe some of you have experienced some of the brownouts that have been occurring. And a new substation may actually be required in order to support the type of development that we're talking about. In addition, getting connected to the grid is a new development, can be difficult and time-consuming. There are currently backups. The utilities themselves are backed up processing these requests. It's hard to find qualified contractors. It's hard to get materials from the supply chain, and oftentimes the utilities don't have the right transmission type for the building, your building's use. So all those things are considerations, not barriers, but considerations for additional development. In terms of water and sewer, most of Broadway is served by Somerville. Some of it is served by Medford. The Broadway corridor is sort of the end of Somerville's sewer system, so it gets less pressure. Most of the corridor is combined water sewer. Ball Square is separated, for those of you who are familiar with that concept, but it's unlikely that that is going to be combined anytime soon. which means that the water pressure is okay, but it's not great, and that might have implications for construction. Other coordinated items, economic development. So as we talked about, one of the key principles is helping existing businesses grow and thrive through this change. So there are a number of opportunities and efforts that the cities are working on. A shop local marketing plan for the corridor, for example, from Winter Hill up to Ball Square. There is an upcoming placemaking study to help really give more of an identity, a recognizable identity to the neighborhood for people who are visiting. Perhaps connect with the ongoing Main Street program. So there are Main Streets throughout the region in the city of Somerville. This is a program that is a nonprofit that allows business owners to come together and support each other. Direct outreach and technical assistance to local businesses. So there's been a lot of effort just to reach out to all the businesses on the corridor, understand who they are, what their needs are, getting contact information from them, so that when the cities are going out and working on these issues, they know who to call, they're building those relationships, and they can really help connect them to the resources they need to thrive. Next, events and programming. As we've talked, there's been a lot of desire from the public to activate these corridors through events, programs, cultural activities, including at Trump Field, using better utilizing that space. And I won't get into any greater detail, but we've talked about waste management, electrical vehicle charging, solar codes, linkage fees, street parking permits, and all sorts of things, all sorts of the little headaches that occur when you've got lots that are split between two municipalities. So both cities are going to continue to work on these outside of this particular project. All right, next, our vision, a work in progress. And I'm going to turn the mic over briefly to my colleague, John.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Cool. I'm John Ford. I'm a civil engineer, urban designer with the team. And the first thing I want to make sure to address is that red draft in the bottom of the screen. No, we didn't upload the wrong version of the PowerPoint. I want to make sure to address that because that's kind of why we're here this evening. So we're on night 3 of our 3 days together for the charrette as part of this project, but it's really a point in a longer process for us working on this project. So the charrette really is a series of loops where we're authentically listening, writing down what we hear, drawing, testing, and then responding with, here's what we heard, is it right? So we're at a point in the process where we're doing exactly that. This is all draft. We're drawing a bunch of stuff, writing down what we heard and formulating guiding principles and drawings and plans for the intent of hearing back from you. Is that right? What did we get here? You know, does this need to tweak? And as of about an hour ago, we were, wherever we were at 5 o'clock, writing the last word and drawing that line is where we stopped and brought it to you this evening. So point in the longer process, draft is the most important word, and we look forward to hearing from you. So my position this evening is a kind of brief interlude in the story. We're going to start presenting some of the drawings that we started to put onto paper of here's what we heard. We have a series of drawings of the corridor, and just to orient folks, Trump Field, Ball Square T, we started to put some things on the map on the same piece of digital paper that maybe haven't been put all there at the same time before. We heard a lot about walkability and Ball Square and Magoon Square. Do they become nodes and focal points, or is it one continuous corridor? One of the first things we look at is the pedestrian walkability radius. So what is a 5-minute walk or a quarter mile from Ball Square and Magoon Square? And also making sure the Magoon Square T is included in that as well. So that's these red circles are a quarter mile walk. So as you know, the squares are pretty close to each other. You can get from one to the other walking, and we're not even showing biking and scooting and all of the things that are happening to get around from a mobility perspective. So we just wanted to start to get that context. We put Medford's and Somerville's bike vision on the map as well. So we're doing a zoning project, but as we start to draw in 3D, it's really important for us to understand if we're talking about building heights and framing the public realm and making sure we capture a lot of the public realm information, that we understand what's between the buildings, because that has a lot to do with what goes into the zoning, even though those drawings may not end up in the zoning. And then that starts to build towards the story. So just like we're at a point in the process for the zoning project, the evolution of the Broadway corridor is also at a point in its process where we're working on zoning together, but the city also has upcoming a plan as part of the street reconstruction to take into account, how can the street be a safer street? What does that include in terms of where trees should go, how parking is arranged, how all users have an opportunity to access the street, vehicles, those walking, biking, and otherwise. Are there opportunities to get at things that we've heard from you all as part of this process, such as those light green circles are existing trees? They're, as you know, not a lot. Can we start showing where they should fill in and getting that on the paper so that as we all move forward, we understand what we're moving forward towards? I want to make sure to be clear, the upcoming city projects will include an extensive public engagement, period. So we don't want to start drawing things, getting the cart before the horse for that work. But what can we use from what we hear from you all to influence that work when it comes? So just on those notes, we heard about other places to sit that make sense in the public realm. Are there places that can be improved in terms of shade that can also support traffic calming? We started putting them on the map. We're not proposing these. This is what we're hearing. It's part of a longer process that really will be done in a comprehensive way in the future. So I'm going to turn it back to Jeff. We're going to start getting into some alternatives. The point being, we're not proposing A, we're not proposing B. We're starting to draw some options so that we can get some feedback. And Ellen will be coming up to in a few minutes to show what they feel like in 3D.
Thank you, John. So again, not proposals, but alternatives that we want your feedback on. And for those of you who are here in person today, we do have 2 stations in the back with these same things pinned up on the wall. And if you want to go take a closer look after the presentation, please do so. And for those of you who are online, this will all be part of the online survey as well, so you can see that at home. In terms of alternative A, so when we're talking about building heights, based on what we heard, we're looking at 4 stories in this yellow area. So those are sort of the edges of the community and in the middle. And we did, just to point out, a lot of folks were very interested in seeing higher density across from Trump Field. Those lots are rather shallow. So it's possible you could get more than 4 stories there. Maybe if you merged lots and consolidated. But we wanted to show a version that was more realistic. Iterative over time, 4 stories might be more realistic here. But you see more 4 to 6 stories right around the square. More than 6 stories, potentially, right on either side of the railroad tracks. And again, 4 to 6 stories in that Magoon Square area. So we'll be asking you to think about how that makes you feel. And then an alternative B, where we go a little more aggressively with the height, which is certainly something that we heard from a lot of folks, where you see that 4 to 6 stories, again, wrapping all the way around Ball Square, the taller, perhaps 6 or more stories, right along either side of the railroad tracks. Again, the 4 stories along here, just because of the size and depth of the parcels, but where we see that 4 to 6 stories again around Magoon Square, and then back down to 4 as you transition to more of a strictly residential neighborhood. So we're going to be asking you for your feedback on these tonight. Next, we looked at ground floor commercial, and as I discussed earlier, we don't want to see required ground floor commercial in a whole lot of spaces, so you don't see vacancies, but we thought it was very important, again, on that core portion of Ball Square, and again, at the core portion of Magoon Square, particularly this bit of Medford Street that has that really nice walkable pedestrian town center sort of vibe. It'd be a pity to lose any of the active ground floor uses there. And then the red is where we would zone for mixed use. And this basically follows the existing zoning where the red you see more or less corresponds with where you allow commercial today, and the breaks here are where you generally allow just residential. So that's alternative A. Alternative B listens to what we heard, that people want to see mixed use everywhere. So we really stretch that red line along the entire corridor, maintain the 2 required nodes, but then allow people to build commercial uses throughout the corridor. And again, if you wanted to do a residential only building, that would be fine. If you wanted to have ground floor commercial or office space, that's also fine. So it would add to the flexibility in the corridor. All right, with this, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Ellen, and she gets the exciting job of showing you some of the visualizations.
Hello, can you hear me all? Okay, great. Like everything that they just said, what we did was we took the information we heard, looked at it in 2D with some of the things that we were going over, but then we also wanted to look at it in 3D and in section in some areas to help us understand what this really means for someone on the street. So we picked 2 locations along the corridor, one at Ball Square, one at Magoon Square, to get a visualization of what these different heights could mean when you're standing on the sidewalk. When we started looking at this, one thing that was actually very telling was just a very simple section down here. So if you could see, this is in Ball Square, heading towards the tracks or down here a little bit further. And on either side here existing, there is about a 1-story building on either side. And for majority of the corridor, it's about 100 feet coming in and out in a few locations. So when you actually are looking at it in sections specifically, it kind of seems a little off scale because some of them are pretty low. So what we did was we started looking as if someone was standing on the sidewalk right here, looking down in this same location. So this is just a sketch of standing in that same location. The tracks would be down a little bit further. This is where the bakery is currently located. And what this would look like if all of the properties went up to that 4-story height that everyone kind of said was a minimum for the most part we were getting. And what that would feel like. Similar to other locations, some of these properties are a little smaller, so this would be if some of them started to combine further. Oop, wrong way. And then if we went up another level. So this would be if we went up to 5 stories with the 6th story as a step back, how that would change for the people that are on the street right now. Oh. And then again, if we moved that forward, so it became kind of an edge to the street on that top story, if this was up to 6 stories in this location, how it would really adjust, and then even a little bit further. So for this one, it would be 6 stories and then step back to 7 or 8. With these higher ones specifically, it would potentially mean combining some lots to even get the size building. So this would be more what could happen if we allowed them to go up quite a bit further. Okay, going the right way. So the other location is down near at Magoon Square. So Broadway and Medford Street here. You can see Trump Field on the edge over here. And we took the view as if you're in this corner looking out towards this intersection. So you can see some of the buildings here that we were looking at. And this is just a sample of a section that was coming through here. Similar, this is a lower building in the area, but not really kind of creating an edge for the street. So standing here looking towards that spot, CVS is right around the corner over here. This is if all of those buildings similarly raised up to that 4-foot or 4-story height that people said they were interested in. You can see this section adjusting in the corner over here. Then similar, another step up. So if this was the 5 stories with the sixth story stepped back, and then if it was pushed towards the street, how much of a difference would that make? And then similar, would there be room? So if you went up to that 6 stories even, and then you had the 7 or 8 that was stepped back. So this would be if there's some of those properties that are a little bigger, or if there was some combined, but how that would change and start to even make this center start to feel. So for both of these, we weren't changing the streetscape in this location. It's really how the buildings are kind of defining the edges. So we were hearing that people wanted higher, so this just helps visualize a little bit more for what the street will start to feel like between them. And I think that's next steps. Yeah.
All right. So, next steps for this particular project, we get to go home after today and synthesize this information further. Obviously, there is the online survey, so we're going to keep that open for a while to continue to elicit feedback. And once we have all that, we'll be working to develop a zoning framework to bring back to both cities for them to review. And that's something that we're hoping to have no later than June for the cities to consider. So that will be the end of this particular piece of the puzzle. Any zoning changes, of course, will have to go through your city councils and go through a public hearing process, so there'll be lots more opportunity to comment on those things publicly. And obviously, a lot more work is going to be done, as John mentioned, the streetscape and roadway improvements in the coming years. So there's actually going to be a lot of opportunities for you to continue to engage to influence the trajectory of this corridor. In terms of tonight, what's going to happen next, and I'll start by explaining what's happening for the folks in person, and then we'll mention for the folks online. We are going to take Q&A. I think we can probably just have you raise your hand physically if you're in the room, and we'll go back and forth between people here in the room and people on Zoom. If you're on Zoom, please use the raise hand feature, and one of our staff will let you know when it is your turn. I think for the folks here, you can probably, if you speak up, you can tell me your question and I will repeat it here on the microphone so that everyone can hear. I would ask my colleagues not to stray far from the mic, including municipal staff, because we don't know what kinds of questions we're going to get. Once the Q&A is complete, that is the end of the event for the folks on Zoom this evening. Again, we'll ask you to take the online survey starting tomorrow. For those of you who are here in person, we do have these 2 stations located here and here. At the tables in front of each of these stations, we have some participant worksheets, or if you have some ideas that you want to share, please write those down. Leave those with us at the check-in table before you head home. We also have sticky notes. If there's anything you want to write down and stick directly onto a poster to comment on an aspect of it, please do. Staff and the consultant team will be at both of those stations, and you are welcome to talk to any of us, ask questions, let us know how we can help. So with that, I will open it up to questions unless anyone from either city has anything else to add before we open it up.
We have a question on the chat.
Okay. Yeah, if you want, I can read it. All right. Are we reading names for the record?
Yes.
Okay. So this is from Corey Hips. The question is, can the 1-story industrial building at 644 Boston Avenue be built over? Currently, the corner of Broadway and Boston Avenue, directly adjacent to the Ball Square T-stop, seems drastically underutilized. And that's a fantastic question, Corey. And of course, this is all private development, and changing the zoning changes the menu of options that private property owners have if they choose to keep a one-story building. Zoning is not going to be the tool to change that. But when we talk about the economic incentives that both communities may want to consider to encourage or incentivize the types of development that you want to see in the corridor, that's really where that sort of strategy works best. Zoning is probably not your tool for that. Yes.
Hi, can you talk a little bit about some of the zoning strategy you might be looking to propose? I know your building goal isn't complete.
Mhm.
For, to support local businesses specifically? Like, could, or is like excluding corporate, corporate businesses or, chain businesses part of that menu? Like, what are some of those tools or levers that you might recommend?
Sure, yes, yes. So the question was, what are some of the zoning tools that we can use to protect local businesses? And zoning is, again, one of those tools. It's a little clunky to do that specifically. There are some things that can be done. One of the things that Somerville has already done is created a small business overlay, and I'm not an expert on that. I may ask one of the city staff to talk more about that, but in effect, it reduces the size, or it reduces the size requirement, maximum size requirement for commercial spaces, so that you make sure that you are making spaces available for small businesses, and you're not allowing a larger footprint to attract, the models that are attractive to a chain retailer. So that's one of actually the really innovative tools that the city uses currently. Zoning is not a good tool to say we want this type of this business, but not this type of this business. That gets into really sticky legal territory. But again, that's where the cities can really use their tax incentives, other incentives to protect and encourage and attract the types of businesses that you do want in the corridor. So there are some of those zoning tools that we'll be looking at to see if the small business overlay is appropriate here, but generally zoning is not the best tool for that. Does anyone else have anything to add on that point? Of course, yes, please.
Hello all, good evening. I am Sarah Lewis. I am the planning director for the city of Somerville. Somerville also has a lot of consideration for formula, what we call, as you were describing them, what we call formula businesses. So that is another piece that we'll look at as how that then falls in with the small business overlay district. So that's another tool that we can fold into this.
Okay, we have another question from the chat from Corey Hips. If redoing the zoning along the corridor, would Somerville or Medford consider something like a land value tax to encourage redevelopment along the corridor? What other incentives might be used to encourage redevelopment? So yeah, that's a great question. That's something that we certainly talked about on Monday night at my table, where a community might consider taxing vacant or underutilized properties at a higher rate until they are in a productive use. Again, I can't personally talk to tax policy of the city of Somerville or Medford. Again, I don't know if any city staff want to say anything further than that. Nope. Okay. But noted, and it is something that we've discussed. so that's something that we could consider. It's one of the few tools that cities have for incentives. And, you know, always happy to discuss that with anybody that's looking to expand in the city. I just wanted to mention that as one tool. Great. So Sal from the Economic Development Department in Medford mentioned that the city of Medford does have tax increment financing, or TIF, which is a taxing district that allows you to raise funds up front based on the expected change in property value in a neighborhood, and they're able to invest those dollars directly back into commercial corridors, which is a great tool for influencing what happens in the corridor beyond what zoning can control. Okay, this is in the chat from Cole RS. Are you maintaining the plan from the 2017 Ball Square and Magoon Square neighborhood plan for a community path extension to Trump Field and potentially Ball Square? So again, I know that John and the team, when they were putting together the schematics for the public realm, did take all those plans into consideration, and to my knowledge, that's going to be one of the starting points for the city's plan for redoing the rights-of-way and mobility in the corridor. Yes.
Is part of this project to look at the zoning for some of the intersecting corridors for Broadway, such as Lowell Street or Albion or Main Street?
So the question is, are we looking at any of the cross streets from Broadway, so Lowell or Medford or Albion? So this, again, for the zoning piece of this, we're looking at essentially 300 feet on either side of the center line of Broadway. So that does capture the immediate intersections along the way. So as you've seen in some of our maps, we really did want to consider, in particular, Medford Street around Magoon Square because of the important commercial core that represents. We generally, our interest falls off once we get to strictly residential parts of the corridor and those intersections. Yes, sir.
We're discussing mixed use. How many floors can be commercial in those 4 to 6-story buildings? Is it all the way up potentially commercial, or the first 2 floors? Or?
That's a wonderful question. We were discussing that earlier today. So the question is, when we're talking about mixed use zoning on a 4 to 6-story building, what can be allowed on those upper stories? So as zoning is written today on I think on both sides, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if a building is zoned for commercial or mixed use, it's the commercial or C1 zone on the Medford side and the mixed residential MR on the Somerville side. You can do residential, you can do commercial. If you wanted offices on the upper stories, you could do that. The market right now is very much driving towards all upper floors being residential, but certainly it is an option to do any of the uses that are allowed within that zoning district. Yes? Not through this process. The question was, will there be specific recommendations about streetscape? So the zoning will not be dealing with streetscape, but again, that's one thing that both cities really want to continue working on in the very near future. So when we came out to the public and we first started, put out our first survey, there was so many of the comments were related to the public realm. We were like, we cannot go out to the public and not talk about the public realm. So even though our deliverables are not going to deal with that, we wanted to use this as an opportunity to get that feedback from the community so that both cities have that information as they start their further work on the public realm. Yes, sir.
Can zoning be used to set minimum heights? So if someone goes in and takes down a building, they're forced to go to 4 stories or forced to go to 2 or whatever?
So the question was, can zoning be used to set minimum height requirements? And the answer is yes. That is an option. That's not something that we've necessarily explored here, but it's an option. And I don't know if you have height minimums in your districts today, yeah. So that is absolutely something we can do. Yes, sir.
Is it possible for you to do an assessment of sunlight, daylight impacts from different height buildings or zoning envelopes in the corridor? That might be useful information and input to the taller buildings, whether it would be a good idea to have that step back in the upper story.
And I'll look to my design colleagues for that one.
A great question about shadow impacts with various building heights. The answer is yes. The short answer is yes, it's doable. I don't think that's in our scope to do, but we did hear a lot about that from the public, and that's a consideration. That's part of why we wanted to make sure to understand the width of the public realm as it relates to specifically the Broadway corridor. It's pretty wide, and the feeling that you'd have as a pedestrian within the corridor is very different in terms of whether that would be 100 feet, as Ellen showed, versus 50. But the specific impacts, there would be a lot to look at there. But it's possible, it's doable.
And to John's point, one of the things that we do look at, as you mentioned, is the width of the street. And Broadway is very wide. And from a shadowing perspective on neighboring buildings across Broadway, we can't get buildings tall enough to be able to shadow across the street. So we really would be thinking about what's happening to the rear, and do we need to maybe have the step backs to the rear of the buildings rather than in the front in order to address that issue. Yes, sir.
Is that true even in Ball Square? I think that's the segment of Broadway that has the narrowest right-of-way.
Do you know what the right-of-way was in Ball Square? Yeah, we're saying even there, it's less, but it's still about 90 feet wide, and you really need, like, a 6-story building wouldn't cast a shadow across the street, by my understanding. And John, please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not a designer.
Well, it's detailed, so the study would be done at different times of day and then specific times of the year. And then we'd evaluate those impacts on different uses, the public uses, schools, public spaces, different. So it would be a detailed study to look at that. But we started to in terms of the width of the street, kind of in the first step at it.
Just checking in with Zoom. As a reminder, if anyone on Zoom would like to raise your hand or send a message in chat, please do. This is from David Tatarakis. Looking at places like Davis Square, we see that many lots are severely underbuilt for what is allowed by zoning. In your work as an urban planner, are you hearing any general themes from developers about what level of density is needed to make projects economically viable these days, considering high interest rates? Once we implement higher density zoning, we want developers to actually start building. That's a fabulous question. And of course, the economics are changing daily. The cost of construction is still very high. I think in some respects, some materials are finally starting to come back to earth. But that's all incredibly expensive. And of course, the taller you build, the different building codes get applied, and that can increase the cost. So on the one hand, developers will want taller buildings in order to make their money back. On the other hand, if you're able to get away with building a shorter building, 3 or 4 stories, you can do that under a different building code, and it's more affordable. So that's a difficult question to answer, but again, falls less under zoning and more into the economic development professionals in both communities continuing to conduct those analyses and work with different property owners to find out what gaps need to be filled in financing. One more? Yeah, and we have one more from online, and we'll hold for that. Okay, from Corey Hibbs. During our Monday breakout session, a local resident expressed concern about ruining the historical appearance of the area. Is there room within zoning requirements to maintain brick facades or other style guidance for the first 2 floors in order to preserve some of the historic character without the issues seen with other historical preservation efforts that may result in no redevelopment? And I think the answer is yes. Even without an historic district, you can have design standards that require the preservation of certain components of existing buildings, and there are a variety of ways that you can slice that. That can be the whole building, it can be the facade, it can be certain features. So yes, there are a number of ways that can be addressed. Yes, sir.
Was there any look at building over the train tracks? Is that, I don't know, is that a possibility?
So the question was there any effort to look at building over the railroad tracks? And that's something that has been discussed, looking at the air rights above the railroad tracks. So we could certainly extend the zoning over the tracks, and if at some point in the future the finances could work to make that happen. Of course, that's extraordinarily expensive, but it is something both cities could consider exploring. Sarah, do you have something to add to that?
I do.
Please do. That's why I said yes and.
Yes, and the difficulty is dealing with the MBTA. I know that sounds quite blunt, and we do work with them frequently. They're, with the city of Somerville, we have a good working relationship with the T. What it does is when you start looking at building over tracks, there are a whole lot more structural difficulties due to vibration of the rail itself, due to clearances that are necessary. So it's a tough thing to pull off in this area where even we've been talking about, sort of the underutilization of regular parcels. I think it's going to be prohibitive for sort of a couple of decades before we can get to that point, at least on the GLX. So. And I will add, I'm a planner, I'm a dreamer, I love that. So please don't think I'm just being a negative naysayer.
All right, so I think with that, again, we're going to continue to be here in person. Please, for those of you who are here in person, feel free to go up to the boards, look at them more closely. It's all reflective of what you saw on the screen. And again, thank you for everyone who is on Zoom. We really appreciate you logging in and encourage you to go back to the website tomorrow, tell your friends and family, and we'd love to hear from as many people as possible. Any closing words of wisdom?
I don't know about words of wisdom, but I'll give you 2 words. Brazilian cheese bread.
Yes, pound de queijo.
So, thank you. Sorry, online people, that was kind of mean. But it's in the box on the snack table right there. And what we did not do at the beginning, too, for anybody in the room, facilities are out towards the front door and just down the hall to the right, should you need a break before you come back in and chat with us. So do want to thank you all for coming. Thank you for your hard work over the last couple of days. And please, yes, stay on Summer Voice, fill in the surveys. Thank you all.